Behind the Red Line, Episode 33. The Shadow of Ireland, Mark Nash and the Women. No One Saw Disappear, Ireland, 1997 to 1998. Ireland is a land of ghosts, old roads, old ruins, old stories whispered through stone and fog. But in the late 1990s, a different kind of ghost walked among the living. Not a myth, not a folk tale, a predator hiding in plain sight, moving quietly between towns, slipping through nights thick with rain, blending into the horizon like another gray shadow in a gray country. His name was Mark Nash, and by the time the courts caught up to him, 2 women were dead, another 2 brutally murdered, and investigators suspected there were others. Women living on the margins, women surviving through street work, women caught between addiction, poverty, and men who took advantage of their silence. Tonight we step into a darker Ireland. Not the one in postcards, but the Ireland of the late 90s. The streets after midnight, the bedsits on the edge of town, the women the newspapers barely bothered to name. This is Behind the Red Line, Episode 33, The Shadow of Ireland. Mark Nash and the Women No One Saw Disappear. Ireland was transforming fast in the late 90s. Economy rising, tourism booming, cities swelling with new money and new strangers. But while Dublin's bars filled with laughter, the margins of the city filled with something else. Women staying in hostels, women living in flats barely held together by leaking pipes, women walking the quays at night, taking clients because rent was due tomorrow. And addiction doesn't wait. And in the middle of this shifting, unstable world, a man appeared who noticed them, a man who watched, a man who followed. Mark Nash. He wasn't dramatic. He wasn't charming. He wasn't theatrical like other serial killers. He was quiet, forgettable, the type of man who could sit beside you on a bus and drift into the background. Predators like that thrive in places where the vulnerable walk alone. It began with 2 women, Catherine Gibbons and Mary Callanan, both struggling with homelessness, both involved in survival sex work, both living in County Mayo, both trusting too easily. And one night, both crossed paths with Mark Nash. He knew their circles, knew their routines, knew their vulnerabilities. The details of that night would later be pieced together like shards of broken glass. A fight, a moment of drunken chaos, and then a spiral into brutality that investigators say continued far beyond what was needed to kill. Their bodies were found in small, cold rooms, the kind of rooms the newspapers call for the destitute, as if poverty is a personality trait. Ireland recoiled. The brutality was shocking, but the profile? Too familiar. Women alone. Women hustling in the underground economy. Women law enforcement historically dismissed. At first, the investigation spun its wheels. Witnesses were unreliable. People were scared. The women's lives were messy, and messy victims don't get fast justice. But Nash made a mistake. While being questioned years later for unrelated violence, he began bragging, talking, spilling fragments of details only the killer would know. Details about the Castlebar murders. He confessed. Then he retracted. Then he changed the story. Again and again. And investigators realized something. Nash was the kind of killer who liked attention, but he wasn't smart enough to lie well. Every version of his story contradicted the last, but all versions had traces of the truth woven through the lies. He had been there, he had done it, and he had enjoyed the retelling. In 1997, 2 more women were murdered in a house on Grange Gorman Lane in Dublin. This case overshadowed everything that happened before. 2 women, Helen M. and Sylvia S., both dealing with mental illness, both living in a halfway house, designed to keep them safe, both vulnerable and heavily marginalized. Someone entered the house in the early hours of the morning. Someone who moved with purpose, with familiarity, with rage pulsing beneath a calm surface. The crime scene was so violent that investigators said it was one of the worst in modern Irish history. And yet, no one noticed the killer slip away. No neighbors heard anything. No one saw a strange man leave. Predators like Nash count on that silence. For years, the Dublin double murders and the Mayo murders weren't connected. Different counties, different victims, different police departments. But eventually, behavioral evidence began to overlap. Similar victim selection, similar rage, similar escalation patterns, similar signatures. And behind the scenes, detectives whispered, "It's him. It's Nash. It has to be." But whispers aren't evidence, and Ireland's justice system needed more. What they got wasn't what they expected. During questioning in the early 2000s, Nash casually described aspects of the Grange Gorman crime scene that had never been released publicly. He described the order in which the women were attacked, the layout of the rooms, the weapon type, the silence in the house, the way one woman tried, even in her final moments, to defend the other. He described it with a calm, even tone. Not excitement, not fear, just boredom, like he was discussing a chore. And that was the moment investigators knew they had their man. The ghost of Grange Gorman was the same shadow who had killed in Mayo. The media focused heavily on the brutality. The lawyers debated the confession. The country wanted answers. But too little attention was given to the women themselves. Catherine, Mary, Helen, Sylvia. They were poor, marginalized, mentally ill, sex working, alone. And that's why Nash chose them. Because killers like him pick the women society overlooks. Women who can go missing quietly. Women police believe are transient. Women the newspapers reduce to a single line. Involved in prostitution. Behind the Red Line doesn't tell their stories like that. We name them. We give them space. We make sure they do not fade. Mark Nash was convicted of the double murder. He will never leave prison. But the unanswered questions remain. Were there more? Were there sex-working women whose disappearances were never linked? Were there victims in the years Nash drifted through Ireland unnoticed? The truth is this: predators like Nash don't start with 4 victims. They escalate. They practice. They perfect their cruelty. The women he murdered were not mistakes of circumstance. They were deliberately chosen, and though the courts closed the cases, Ireland still carries the shadow of his violence quietly beneath its rain-soaked streets. This is Behind the Red Line, Episode 33, The Shadow of Ireland, Mark Nash and the women no one saw disappear.